This podcast is about introducing our fans to the animals, plants, and other products that we work with at Josh's Frogs. It's an opportunity to paint a picture of our hobby that is refreshing. We want you guys to be successful with the animals that you're keeping, and we want our hobby to grow ethically and sustainably into the future. Welcome to the Josh's Frogs podcast. Today I have Zach Brinks back again to talk about wood. But before we do that, I just want to let you know that the Josh's Frogs podcast is brought to you by Josh's Frogs. We're your one-stop shop for everything you need for your reptile or amphibian pets. So we have everything from caging to live plants to live feeders to all the dry goods and even the animals that go inside those enclosures. So check us out at joshsfrogs.com. We have unmatched customer service with a very generous live arrival guarantee, up to 72 hours on your live insects. We want you to be able to take care of your animals easily. So we provide everything you need, from blogs and articles to YouTube videos. We want to help you take better care of your animals. So check us out, joshsfrogs.com. But without further ado, welcome, Zach, to the Josh's Frogs podcast for your second episode.
Howdy. Thanks for having me.
So remind us a little bit about what you do here at Josh's Frogs and how you came to work here at Josh's Frogs.
Cool. You stole me from Petco. No, not really. But, this was a college job for me. It'll be 17 years in a couple months. And kind of, built up and up from there over the time, just kind of did a bit of everything. Animals is always like my focus, my big thing, had a zoo at home and such. And now I oversee live operations, so the live side of things, plants, insects, animals, aka the fun things, and then help out with a bunch of other projects too.
Cool. Now talk a little bit about your herp experience before you came to Josh's Frogs. What were some of the things that you kept and bred and did along the way?
My species list before Josh's Frogs was around 30 or 40 different critters. Had a ribbon snake when I was 5. I had asthma and allergies when I was a kid, so couldn't really have a lot of furry pets. And, kind of grew from there, bred various local to southern Texas where I grew up type herps, leopard geckos, bearded dragons, became a Josh's Frogs customer. I want to say it was around 2005 or 2006, I think, when my girlfriend at the time nearly kicked me out over smelly fruit fly cultures. And, I've been working with dart frogs for, close to 20 years now.
Wow. That's a long time.
Long time. That's cool. More than nearly half my life. So pretty neat.
Cool. So we're going to talk about wood today. So from a very broad sense, like somebody who has a terrarium and is talking about setting it up, why would you use wood in a terrarium? Or maybe you already have a tank set up and you don't have any wood in it. Talk about the use cases. Why is it important to have that type of stuff inside of a terrarium?
Yeah. You can almost think of wood as like the structure of your house. So instead of a bunch of pine 2x4s, you might be using manzanita or cork or bamboo, which technically isn't a wood. We can talk about that later. And basically it's to provide structure. So it's structure for animals to climb on. You can mount plants on. They provide visual barriers. I'm sure if anybody lives with someone, you don't want to sit there and stare at them all day. So sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of a privacy curtain. Enrichment, like just as that animal, hunts down insects or moves around to bask or shield itself from UV. It makes the environment that much more complex as it would be in nature. And it kind of just promotes those natural behaviors and, a healthier animal that's more engaged. I know just from talking with some friends in the zoo field, when we think about enrichment, if you ever go to a zoo and you see a bird or a primate, they may have toys or, sometimes when it's really hot out, you'll even see people put food in ice cubes, stuff like that to keep the animals engaged, kind of, get them, you could say problem solving, get them interacting with things that aren't in a normal day to day. A lot of times a complicated wood structure can add a little bit of that environment. When we're talking about reptiles and amphibians, keeping them in bioactive environments or more complicated environments is a form of enrichment. It's well-being for your animal.
Cool. I think also too, it also creates more surface area as well too.
Yeah, exactly. You could see easily taking especially if most of your herps, some fly, not many, and they don't swim around in the air or float. So, especially with I think of terrestrial dart frogs, Tinctorius, terrestrial generally means they're found within 3 meters of the ground. You put a lot of branches or logs in there. You can take a tank with a fairly small footprint and increase that usable surface area, double, triple, even more. and even more so if some of those branches and stuff are hollow. You're
Cool.
providing a lot of hides and stuff that way too.
Cool. So before we talk about what type of woods we'd recommend that you would use in a terrarium and why you would use them, can you talk a little bit about some woods that you would like say, hey, no, you should keep these away from your animals and
Um,
or certain animals? Can you
it
talk a
really
little bit about that?
depends. Most woods out there can be used in the right type of environment. So even grapevine, grapewood, it's a very common wood. It's great and humid, or it's not great and humid. It'll actually break down. It's great as food for your springtails and isopods in a humid
Yeah.
environment or millipedes. But in like an arid condition where it's not going to be exposed to moisture, it'll be fine. It'll
Yeah.
last a long time. That's true of most woods. There are some aromatic woods like cedar, stuff of that nature that at least in some of the pines, when they're fresh, they shouldn't be used. A good rule of thumb is if you can kind of cup the wood or kind of put it in your hands and then like sniff it and you smell something strongly, especially if it smells like kind of potpourri-ish smell or
Yeah.
whatnot, it's generally not going to be safe to use.
Yeah.
And then also if it has any kind of like active sap
Mm.
or it's live, it
Yeah.
hasn't been had a chance to dry. The woods we work with have most for the most part been either dried by nature or kiln dried.
Yep.
So they're we don't have to worry about that kind of hazardous stuff.
Cool. Cool. All right. Now talk a little bit about specific types of wood or specific types of wood products that you would use in a terrarium and kind of walk us through where you would use them and why you'd use them and how to set those up.
Cool. Okay. So let's talk about some woods. So I've got a big old box of wood here. You guys can't see, so you have to trust me on it. There's the parts of it. So first time we're going to talk about a grass. Bamboo, commonly called bamboo wood. It's a giant grass. We get our stuff actually cut from Florida. It's probably the only invasive plant you should actually have in your tank. You can, it comes in long stalks. We generally sell it in up to 3 foot lengths. You can actually drill it. Wood is kind of see here that there's these partitions that go through with wood. It grows in closed cells. So you can actually make little hides and stuff in there. You can have the full tube, which can be hard to get animals out. So we like to split it. Got a nice smooth surface for them to climb on. Then you can also even drill holes and stuff in it, which make great, places for animals to lay eggs or hide. These were both actually set up in our Philsuma clemeri or neon day gecko tanks, and they actually they occur in bamboo stands.
Yep.
That's why their head is yellow, so they can peek out and blend right into the
Oh, that's
bamboo.
cool.
It can mold a little bit. It generally holds up for quite a while in a humid environment as long as it's not soaping wet, and almost indefinitely in like a dry or arid type environment.
Now those sticks that we sell, those are pretty long. If I needed to cut it, what would I use to cut it?
You'd use a finishing blade. So anything like if you were going to use it for like trim work on a house, generally a really fine blade works really, really well. Of smaller and more teeth on that blade, or a great way to do that. I generally use a circular saw, and then you can actually take an axe or something sharp and split it. You can see there's some of these fibers hanging off here. It's actually
Yeah.
you can't really see it on the structure, but this is almost made up of a bunch of little straws
Yeah.
almost. So it actually splits this way really easily. It's really dense when you cut it that way. So
Cool. Cool. And so you talked a little bit about smaller geckos, so like maybe the Madagascar type geckos. Any other animals that you'd use bamboo for?
there's some antennas
Yeah.
that occur natively with it. Really, you can use it for a wide variety of animals. Generally, it's a smaller arboreal. You can see it's really smooth
Mhm.
and have pretty broad surfaces. You can even orient it that way, make up great different basking zones and
Yeah.
everything. But really, it's for those smaller animals that generally are pretty good at sticking to things.
Yeah.
For the most part, it's really easy to slide off of, which also makes it a little bit easier to clean when something poops on it. Which, if you have a day gecko, it will. So
Cool. Cool. All right. What else you got in that box?
let's see. While we're on the topic of knotwood, you can talk about this knotwood. So this is actually a really cool product. It's a bendable branch, and it's actually wrapped in cocoa fiber, so it's environmentally friendly. Looks kind of fake when you get it, but once you plant it and get moss on there, it'll do that. And unlike real wood, you can bend this to be exactly the shape and dimensions you want, which is kind of handy. This is one of our natural cocoa tree branches, and we sell 2 different types. We get these made. For
That's cool.
ourselves.
That's cool.
So,
Now, if you wanted to grow some plants on there, what are some ways in which you could attach stuff to that?
well, I happen to have this tree down here. So, and these plants were freshly watered, so I'll be a little careful, or I'm going to have wet pants the rest of the day. So, you can see there's a branch back here. There's one of these new products we just brought in. We're checking out. These are different bromeliads, including some tillandsia. So they can be attached in various ways depending on the media you're using. I'm a big fan of E6000 craft glue. That you hold it in place, dry it on there. You can use bamboo skewers and kind of make a little cradle. We have a lot of blogs that reference that. And if you're like me and need a visual example, and if you're going to mount them in a way where you can go back and remove the mounting device before you put animals in there, even things like plastic netting or fishing line work really
Oh,
well
cool.
too.
Cool.
But even hot glue can work. Just keep in mind, hot glue doesn't hold up very well in a humid environment,
Yeah.
but super glue gel does.
Cool.
And that's even safe to use with corals and stuff in a saltwater tank. So as long as it's cured and dried, it'll be perfectly fine with your animals.
Yeah, that's a cool way to make some of those unnatural pieces of wood or the cocoa branches look a little bit more natural by adding those plants to it.
Yeah, and it's a cool way to just kind of add some stuff in and grow it outside. So here's some vine and a phyllo that were actually strapped on. You can see on the back here, there's a little bit of fishing line right there. So before this would be used, this was strapped on. It'll grow out for about 3 months or so, and then we'll actually trim the fishing line off before it's put with an animal.
Cool. Cool.
Neat
Now, if
little-
you were to purchase something like that, how do you put that in your tank? Like, how do you put it in your
You
tank?
can do them in a lot of different ways. The simplest way is to just kind of wedge it in place.
Yeah.
Or even you can imagine if there's a background here. If you lay it in place, suddenly you made a cool little cave.
Yep.
And so you've got the surface area that's more climbable. This, even if the plants are oriented in a little bit of the wrong way, they'll adjust over time and grow
Cool.
up to the light.
Cool.
You can easily put it in. I've used stainless steel screws before. Once again, super glue works really well. Or you can use a combination of different things and kind of wedge them into place,
Cool.
make it more complicated.
Cool.
So I don't know how many of our audience goes field herping, goes out
Yeah.
and looks for reptiles and amphibians. But oftentimes the best place to find a lot of those guys is when they're undercover, like in wood piles, things like
Mhm.
that. And you can replicate something and try to make it a little bit nicer.
Yeah.
In your environment, it'll provide
Yep.
a lot of hiding places for them.
Yeah, yeah. And oftentimes people are a little bit nervous about creating hiding spots because they think like, oh, I'll never see my animal if
Yeah.
I have a lot of hiding spots. But we found that a lot of times those hiding spots create an environment where the animal feels like, oh, I can hide at any second, so they're out a little bit more than they
Yeah,
normally would.
exactly. They kind of risk venturing out
Yeah.
to the open because they know their big bad predator owner
Yeah.
isn't going to eat them at any moment. A lot of times that's crucial to like lower stress levels. A lot of hiding places in more complicated environments have been linked to like lower levels of corticosteroids, commonly
Mhm.
called stress hormones in blood. So keeping them in that type of environment actually, can help with an animal that grows faster, that's healthier, that lives longer, or breeds. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a kind of a win-win. It looks a lot nicer and it's much more healthier for the
yeah,
animal as
a
well,
little
too.
bit of investment and planning up front pays off dividends long
Yeah.
term.
Cool.
So.
All right. What else you got in the box?
So we'll jump into cork because why not? We've heard of cork. Those of us that are fans of wine are familiar with cork, or a lack of it. A lot of it's going synthetic. So we get all of our cork from Portugal. We sell it in a lot of different ways. Where's that line with the camera? Right here, probably. Okay, cool. I'm getting a thumbs up, so we're good. So we get our cork from Portugal. We buy it by the 40-foot container. It's really cool. They load up a bunch of cork and they put it in a big metal box, and then they heat it up in a way that'll kill everything bad that we need to worry about, and then they mail it to us. So we have a bunch of different like ways it's offered, a bunch of different sizes. Since we also get it directly from Portugal, it's pretty cheap.
Yeah.
This is a cork tube or a cork log. It's pretty big. Sometimes we'll get them up to 4 or 5 feet, which is cool. We have these available at shows really often, and we're working on getting these to be able to be mail order for our customers. They're just kind of big and awkward. Neat things about cork is it's incredibly rot resistant. It does float, so it's not a great aquarium wood, but if you're like running water through it or providing hides in a humid area, it's great. It's environmentally friendly. Cork, it's a type of oak tree. They can live over 200 years. Generally, after they're about 15 to 20 years old, they get harvested anywhere from every 3 years up to about every 10 years. And that harvesting doesn't actually hurt the tree. They actually use different spade bits and stuff like that and pop it right off the
Yep.
tree, and then it regrows. So it's a completely like renewable resource, which is pretty neat too.
Yep.
A lot of these cork plantations are like century or more old, and especially since a lot of wine bottles are going to like screw-on caps or synthetic cork, they kind of need to find a way to. A lot of these families need to know what to do with cork now. So
Yeah.
the more we can use in our vivariums, the better off for animals, and it's a win for long-term family business.
Yeah.
So
Some
pretty neat
people
stuff.
have talked about the stuff that's on the cork.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Is that mold? Is that something we should be
It's not
scared
mold.
of?
It's a lichen. It's this really cool symbiotic relationship between an algae and a fungi. And I read a paper recently that suggested it was even 2 different types of fungi. So, or algae, I think. So cool. Look it up. That's really neat. Doesn't generally come back to life, but it can. And it's actually a sign that it's an incredibly clean, stable environment.
Mm.
So if you have lichen growing on things, it's actually, or you get wood that has lichen on it, it's generally a sign that that area has little to no pollutants and has like a really high quality, like air quality.
Cool. So
So
nothing to be concerned. Like, hey, there's a bunch of this greenish, yellowish
no, and
stuff on the wood.
it's dead. Like in the Viv, it will mold, and then your springtails and isopods will eat it and love you for it. So it might look a little funky at first. You might
Yep.
be growing a little cotton ball farm, but it's not going to hurt anything, and that'll clear up really quickly if
Cool.
it does. You can. Some people like to scrub it and remove it. You can, or you can just feed your tank with it.
Cool.
But yeah, comes in a lot of different ways. So that's a log. We've also got flats, which are pretty cool, and they're actually backed with ground cork. And it's neat because they actually don't make this. The adhesive is actually the cork sap itself. So they actually just under heat and pressure they boil this stuff,
Mm.
and then they squish it, and it makes a panel. Excuse me. And they use that natural adhesive to actually flatten out cork that they've scarred the back of, and then they've steamed it and flattened it. So it's kind of an all natural, nothing harmful in here product.
Yep.
Then you can trim it to fit if you need to. We offer it in a bunch of different sizes, and then you can just silicone it right to your background.
Yeah, yeah. So that's in our background section. That size that you have holding up, that's a
Whoop.
12 by 12, I believe.
Yeah,
What
that's
that
a
is.
12 by 12. One thing to keep in mind is, like most woods, cork will expand very slightly when it gets wet.
Yeah.
So when you do put it in your background, you don't want to wedge it in there really tightly, or else you might find yourself with less of a tank and more of several panes of glass.
Yep.
So give it a little gap, and you can even fill that little bit of gap with like sphagnum moss or even a little bit of silicone, something that'll allow it to expand and contract and stuff there.
Yeah.
Nice save. But yeah.
And then you mentioned cutting it. What type of blade or how would you end up cutting
It's
it?
a little bit less important. Any good carpentry saw would be fine. It's not very fine as far as a cutter. I use a Zoom, or I just use a good Diablo blade on my table saw, but really any table saw blade, once again, the more teeth you have, the smoother the cut, the easier it'll be.
Yeah.
And you could argue the safer it'll
Yeah.
be. Always use a push stick if you're using something like that. But
Yep.
yeah, a table saw works really well to kind of trim it down to
Cool.
size, even though the ones we sell should fit like a lot of like common size tanks to
Yeah.
begin with.
Exactly. Cool.
Cool. We've also got another cork branch. See, they're variable. They're cool. It's what's neat about cork and wood in general. Each piece is just so unique. It's
Yeah.
like its own piece of art. So that's where we sell a lot of individually pictured pieces of wood on our website, so people can kind of browse and pick exactly what they want.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. You can see how this has multiple entrances and exits and will make a really killer hide. And you could even stretch it a little bit to get to your animal, or break it off and have multiple pieces. I think we've got cork flats, which, hey, speak of that, cork flats, generally we consider it a cork flat if it's less than like a half circle.
Yep.
Or what around. So if that radius is more smooth or more flat than round. They're really cool. They're a popular choice for like stacking or leaning for habitats and cover.
Yeah.
You can also use stuff like our spray foam.
Yep.
And our silicone and some cocoa fiber or peat moss to make like a custom background, which is pretty popular too.
Now, how would you attach that using the foam? Like, are you spraying the foam and then pushing that into the foam? How
You
do
start
do
with a clean glass surface. Whenever I use any glass surface, I like to prep it with a bit of rubbing alcohol, that evaporates off on its own. It makes sure it's clean. Lay the tank down. Some people like to run some beads of silicone and stuff on the glass just to give it like some texture. I find that's normally not necessary, but if you overdo it with a foam or put stuff that's too heavy on the background, it can pull off.
Yep.
And then lay this where I want it. I'd also pair that with, I was using any planting pots or piping for any kind of like a water feature or anything like that. Lay all that out, kind of dry fit before you foam it.
And I'm going to say something. Zach's done this a ton of times, so I just want to clarify. You want to take that tank and put it down, the background down before you're doing any of that kind of stuff. Don't try to do it while it's standing up.
I mean, some of us like challenges, but yeah. So laying that down flat, and then a lot of times you'll lay it on the back, turn it, lay it on the side, turn it, lay it on the other side, and so on and so forth that way.
Cool. Those also are really good turtles and that kind of stuff, or other frogs that are aquatic, to get them out of the water. It's a good thing to use.
They'll definitely float, and you could even put a little bit of Java moss or something on there, and it'll just kind of grow over it and look really cool and look really grown in.
Yeah,
it's really neat to do kind of like a mini like wetland type habitat that way.
Yeah,
we
like
do that with some of our Bumbina and our Firebelly toads.
like a moss mat that's floating in the water. Yeah, that's really cool.
We'll also float that in tadpole tanks sometimes. It's an easy way for froglets to come out of the water when they metamorph. So.
Yep. It's got a lot of texture they can get up on.
Then they gave me a bunch of cork branches, which are cool because I'd never seen these available until we brought them in. And these are actually exterior cork branches. Part of keeping a tree healthy is pruning it.
Yep.
So they actually still have the pith or the actual wooden side that will decay faster than the actual cork bark will. And your springtails, your isopods, stuff like that will love it. And remember, with a lot of these things, the bark is where it's providing a lot of structure. So even as it decays inside, it doesn't mean like normally the branch will collapse or anything like that.
Yep.
I've used these. I love them for like abronia tanks. A lot of those different lizards that like to go out on a limb or whatnot, and then also they need that structure. Maybe they're too heavily bodied to really they won't tear up your plants. Even some of your perching frogs and stuff that are okay with not quite smooth surfaces. Cork is kind of rough. Will love this too.
Yeah. I've used them with my bicolor, and instead of going vertical up, like using them horizontally,
sideways and everything. Yeah, that's what's nice. You can, it is wood. So most of us, we have a garage with some basic woodworking tools. You can drill it, you can cut it, you can do a lot to it and kind of make that tank yourself. I've done big plywood tanks where I literally drilled a hole through the outside structure, put silicone on the base of this, and drew like a big old lag screw through the bottom of a big branch to hold it in place and stuff like that. Perfectly fine.
Yeah.
It's cool. They come in a bunch of different sizes. That's why they're really good to be individually pictured. And we even sell twigs that are like 6 or 8 inches long, really thin ones, all the way up to, this is a really cool one, actually. Get out of here. Kind of a neat trident, but you can see it gives a lot of different surface area, and you can add a lot of depth.
Yep.
And I have seen also it's neat because you can have a branch, the animal goes up, or if you have a terrestrial animal, you can easily lay it down and kind of mimic like roots or a tree buttress going down, and that gives you could see like a lot of frogs, a lot of
Yeah.
vertical surface or invertebrates, things
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
you've in some ways, you've exponentially grown the amount of surface area that your
Yeah,
tank
like
has.
so if you think about here's the floor of the tank, here's your light up top. You've got a lot of surface area. You've got a lot of areas that are actually collecting and dripping water, which is going to change how water flows. Underneath is going to be drier than the rest
Yep,
of your habitat and probably a little bit less humid.
yep,
You're blocking light and also UV, so you're providing temperature, humidity, and light, photoperiod variance for that animal. So you've
yeah,
just made that habitat a lot more complicated,
yep,
especially when you go through and put a lot of epiphytes like
yep.
bromeliads, mosses. There's a bunch of ferns that do really well. That way, you make a really really complicated tank.
Yeah,
That's it's complicated from a you know the activity for the animal and what it's exposed to, but it's easy for you.
yeah, it
So
allows the animal to take care of themselves.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Instead of you having to like dial that in, that's where larger tanks become so much more of an advantage and more complicated
Yeah,
tanks. Like the animal can choose where it wants to be, so you
exactly.
can concentrate on replicating an environment instead of replicating this is an animal with this needed hot spot, this
Mhm.
needed humidity to shed.
Yep.
You want to make sure you're hitting that, but you can provide a lot of opportunities too,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
naturally.
that's cool,
So
that's cool.
let's see here. So another really good one I see thrown around is spiderwood, which is cool, kind of gnarly. Carry a few different sizes. Um, it's cool, and what's neat about it is it looks kind of cool, but we really should be thinking of it like this because spiderwood's actually a root ball. It's a root structure from a Chinese azalea, a rhododendron. It's a plant that's very, very common, mass cultivated. It's a really hard wood. It has some tannins, but not nearly as much as a lot of other woods
Yep,
will. Tannins are just basically they're released into the water. They lower the pH. They soften it. They kind of make it kind of brown looking.
yep,
They can make your water look dirty, but they don't really hurt things.
yep.
Um, but yeah, they're really cool, and you can flip it around and use it as a base really easily for stuff. I love using it along the sides of like a pond or whatnot, and kind of have that like eroded out piece of wood look. Um, you can glue it onto the background. You can turn it upside down and have a lot of structure to it. And it's a wood that's going to last a long time in a
Yep.
humid environment.
Yeah, I really like the way those look, especially
Yeah.
when you put them on their background and just stick out and have a bunch of
Yeah,
branches
I
like
mean, you
that.
can imagine something like that or even that, and then when you add plants to it, they're gonna grow out and form almost like a ledge or a layer for some of
Yeah,
your lighter animals to hang out on or
yeah,
under. So it's a great way to kinda just give dimension to the tank and a lot of different layers for them
yeah.
to use.
Again, a bunch more surface area inside
Yeah,
your tank. You just made your tank bigger.
yeah, and if you have a fish tank, you plop that in there, it looks like you got a tree stump, or if you turn it upside down, I even see people put moss and stuff on top and make like little mini aquatic bonsai, which is pretty cool too. So
Aquatic trees.
exactly. Why not? Cool. That's spiderwood. Um, Another popular one is Malaysian driftwood. Malaysian wood. It's cool because it doesn't actually. This is kind of weird. When I learned this, it blew my mind. It doesn't actually refer to like a single species, and it's technically not driftwood.
Mm.
So it's from Malaysia, so they got part of like they're like half right. But it's really cool. A lot of this comes from various types of trees. A lot of times they were coastal trees or trees that grew along rivers, and then when they settlements were built up, putting in harbors or ports or enlarging that kind of stuff. Generally, several decades, sometimes over a century ago, a lot of the trees and stuff were just bulldozed and then they were buried.
Mm.
And they were buried in like kind of an ironish rich clay. So that's where they get kind of that kind of brownish, sometimes to almost a reddish color.
Yeah,
And that's why most of the pieces they actually feel a lot lighter than you'd expect them for their size, which is an advantage to us
yeah,
because they've been like kind of slowly cooking
yep,
in that substrate for so long. So it's actually Malaysian, it's driftwood, just like any wood. It is a tree, got chopped down or
yeah.
bulldozed. With this kind of stuff, it's a byproduct that happened a long time ago. And there's apparently, as they're going in and redoing harbors or ports or expanding on things, they're going out and digging this stuff out
Yep.
and then selling it into the trade.
That's cool.
So
That's cool.
it's pretty neat stuff. It looks really cool. Sometimes you'll get pieces, they go at them with a chainsaw, so you get like flat sides or backs like that. And that's like a cool piece to like, you could
Yeah.
silicone or with proper support right onto the background. A lot of times a piece like this that's a bit heavier, I lay the tank on its back, silicone the heck out of it, and then maybe even put a couple PVC tubes as kind of footings or
Yep.
pilings to hold it up, and then foam over those to give it some of that structure to hold it in place. You'll get all these little cracks and crevices because this stuff did rot, but it's basically preserved. And it doesn't handle water quite as well as cork, but you can still get several years out of it,
Cool.
even in a underwater humid environment. If you use it underwater, you got to soak it; it will
Yeah.
float. But
A lot of character in those pieces of wood.
yeah, there are, and they come in a bunch of different styles and stuff too. So that's where it's really popular as an individual. That's a really cool piece here too. I'll just surround myself here. Would you? There we go. So it's a really cool bottom piece, just with a lot of structure. So you could think in this environment, there's so many little crevices and stuff. You could fill those with sphagnum moss and root plants into it.
Yep.
Little hidey holes for your animals. You know, putting that into a background. Say you have a heat lamp up here. Suddenly you've got a nice warm spot that's radiating down here, and then progressively getting cooler below. The wood will, conduct a little bit of that heat, but
Yep.
shelter so that animal can kind of has multiple layers to dial in right where it
Yeah.
wants to be.
How
So
warm or cold it
yeah,
actually wants to be.
exactly. So
Yeah.
it's pretty neat stuff. Then jump into another wood. Oh, there it is. So it's actually a cactus. This stuff is really, really neat. It's sometimes called cholla wood. Cholla cactus. It's actually a cactus skeleton. You can kind of see it. It looks kind of bone-like almost. They tend to be hollow in the center. That's where the cactus's vascular system and stuff is in life. So these will grow. They'll die. They're harvested. A lot of times they're sandblasted and cut into different sections. We sometimes get limbs up to 3 feet long.
Yep.
You don't want to put them in a humid environment if you like looking at it, because it won't be
Yeah.
around for very long. Some people even like to put them in like shrimp tanks because
Yeah.
they'll chew on them and stuff. Um, I love them in a humid viv, a little bit of it, because it does break down. It's cool because some of the fibers are really, really tough, so you get a really kind of creepy looking structure as your springtails and isopods eat it. And it's a great way just to get different nutrients into your tank. Like,
Yeah.
think of it like enrichment for your cleanup crew.
Yep.
And then in more desert type habitats, this stuff can be around for
Yeah.
nearly ever.
Yeah.
So it's cool. It's a little bit of a softer wood,
Yeah.
but
And then
pretty neat.
open in the center, so it even provides some opportunities for smaller lizards to use it as a hide.
Yeah,
too.
yeah, exactly. Like there's a lot of stuff you can even partially bury it.
Yeah.
And I've seen people do that. I put a little bit of moss in there and like make this into their humid hide.
Mm.
It does result in eventually part of it like decomposing and breaking down, but like in a desert habitat, like that's really natural looking.
Yeah.
That looks really cool.
That's cool.
So
That's really cool. A unique
stuff.
piece.
Yeah,
Yep.
it definitely is. Then lastly, I've got manzanita, which is cool. We're familiar with it. Most of this comes from the Southwest U.S. Our manzanita comes primarily out of California. Manzanita is Spanish for little apple. It's actually a reference to the little fruit on these things in the wild.
Mhm.
And actually, like over half the species of manzanita like aren't doing well in the wild. But fortunately, there's a lot of really common ones. They're foundation species. They're one of the first plants that kind of comes back after a wildfire.
Oh, cool.
And so they kind of flood the area. They grow in really thick. And then as they get bigger and thicker, they actually themselves pose a hazard for wildfires in the future. So
I bet.
a lot of areas actually keep these kind of clean or whatnot, routinely go through and thin them out,
Mhm.
is a way to kind of wildfire control or
Yeah.
mitigation. And then we end up getting the pieces. So
That's
it's something
cool.
that otherwise would be just, left to rot or hauled
Yeah.
off somewhere. And we're able to utilize it. They come in a bunch of different structures, from logs to sticks to twigs. You can see a little bit of it here. See that kind of reddish brown color? That's their natural bark. You can get it natural. We find we like it sandblasted. The wood holds up a lot better, and that skin will actually decompose a little bit, even in a drier environment.
Yep.
It works well wet or dry. Like any wood, it's going to last a lot longer when it's dry, but you can easily still get years and years out of this in a humid environment.
Cool.
In a lot of different shapes and sizes. So this would even be something that'd be adequate for an animal like a bearded dragon there. And you could think about
Yep.
the complicated environment, multiple basking areas. It can
Yeah.
get up, under. One thing to keep in mind about wood is you provide a little crevices, so your feeder insects can get in there. That can be a good and a bad thing.
Yeah.
It means the animal can't immediately go and get to them, but at the same time, as long as you're sure there's not like a lot of feeder insects building up in a
Yep.
tank, it's a great way if now your pet, instead of just being lazy by the food bowl, has to like wait for them to come out and
Yep.
scavenge them and stuff too. And in a bioactive environment, it's a place for your bugs to hide.
Yeah.
So, and hopefully not get eaten as much themselves. But yeah, a lot of cool. We carry just that stuff, and then occasionally we're lucky enough to get in what we call weathered manzanita. And that's manzanita. It's kind of been sandblasted by nature.
Yeah.
So it's out there. It's died in the wild, which is kind of weird to think about. And it's been sandblasted, so you get a lot more detail to it,
Yep.
which is really cool. It's a little bit harder to come by. It's a little more expensive, but like aesthetically, it's really hard to beat.
And it tends to be lighter than the
Yeah, it'll
the
be
fresh
kind of
stuff.
like a gray or a white,
Yeah.
just because this is not only has like the wind and sand grains and stuff like washed away the bark, but it's just been blasted by UV for so
Yeah.
long. Even this other stuff, it will turn gray.
Mhm.
I had some pieces that were in bearded dragon tanks for the better part of a decade, and the parts that were closer to the mercury vapor
Yep.
bowls were like gray. And
Yeah.
the parts
Yep.
further away looked fresh. So
Yep.
it's UV degradation primarily.
That's cool. That's cool.
Cool.
Awesome, Zach. Thanks for educating us on wood and all the different types that we can keep inside of our terrariums and the cool things that allows us to do inside a terrarium. So thank you. We're going to move on to a lightning round. I know you've done some of these questions before. We'll see if some of these answers have changed.
Yeah, they will, because I actually forgot about this part. So we're good.
All right. If money and space were no issue, what's your dream pet?
My dream pet, and I have to choose one.
Yes.
There's not a cop out, be like an environment or something like that. If money and space were no issue, I would love to have a very large bioactive vivarium with a pair of Kimberly rock monitors.
Oh,
Those
cool.
things are super cool.
Yeah.
So-
Good idea. All right. Besides Josh's Frogs, what's another brand in our hobby or another breeder in our hobby that's doing really cool things that you'd like to give a shout out to?
There's a bunch of stuff going on out there. I said Sam down in Panama with natural tanks in the past or whatnot. He's still doing awesome, great things. I've really enjoyed recently getting to know Alex over at Northwest Zoo.
Yep.
And some of his conservation ventures are it's a really cool way to go about the business and stuff.
cool.
So that's neat.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. What is your favorite animal or plant in the entire world?
Right now, I've been thinking about them for a few days, so I'd have to go with some of the different Abronia, especially a Graminia, like the little dragon lizards that live in trees.
That's cool.
And they give live birth.
Yep.
They're from cloud forest. They're kind of secretive, so when you do see them, like it's a treat. You don't just they're not sitting there staring at you all the time. So I mean, what's not to love?
That's cool. All right. You have an hour of free time. What are you doing with that free time? What's Zach doing to unwind?
I am probably reading a book. It's about 50-50 with my daughter or not. So yeah, and when I read, I tend to rotate between 3 books. So I'll do 2 nonfictions. One will be my own interest. Right now I'm gonna kick on like paleontology, business interests. So right now I'm reading a book that's around like different strategies surrounding sales and stuff as we build that out. And then nonfiction, my guilty pleasure, Clive Cussler books.
Clive Cussler.
I know. It's a winner. Yeah.
All right. Last question, probably the hardest question. If you had everybody's ear and you wanted to communicate one thing to them, you wanted to encourage them in one way or correct them in one way, what's one piece of advice that you would give to people right now in your life? What would you say to people?
Just in general, I'd encourage people to like be skeptical. There's a lot of different ways to be successful, I think, into the hobby, and there's a lot of voices out there that say like you got to do it this way or you have to do it this way. And there's a lot of different ways to be successful. So you can either, take one, stick to one and really run with it, or like do your own research, do a deep dive, jump in, which for me is just as much fun as actually the animal keeping part. And, kind of put together like what's best for my situation and my animals and everything too.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Zach, for dropping some knowledge on us when it comes to wood and other animals and how to best take care of those animals. Zach is a staple here at Josh's Frogs. You'll see him in a lot of the videos. A lot of our blogs were written by him. And you'll see him at some of the shows that we do as well, too. So make sure you run up to him and say hi and check out some of the other content that he's created for Josh's Frogs. So thanks a lot, Zach, and have a great one.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoy this content and want to stay up to date, make sure to like, subscribe, and follow us across social media. We always want to bring you the best content, so let us know what you think in the comments. And for all your reptile and amphibian needs, be sure to check us out at joshsfrogs.com. We have an amazing selection. Until next time, stay curious, stay froggy, and keep exploring.